Greetings, book lovers everywhere, and welcome to E-Train Talks. I'm your host, E-Train. I'm a 13-year-old literacy advocate, podcast host. Of course, I'm a book lover, and I'm so excited for today's interview. So, a lot of my interviews, I just have one person I'm talking to, but we have an author and illustrating duo here. And they're a couple that don't just write together, but they're on a mission to make our planet a better place. They're two people on a mission to save our planet's wildlife and wild spaces and places. And they're using the power of stories to do it. So, who am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about the creative storytelling duo, Hayley and John Rocco. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us. We're so excited to be here.
I'm super excited that you're here as well. And the book that we're going to be highlighting today is Wild Places, The Life of Naturalist David Attenborough. So, it's a story that inspires young and old readers alike to celebrate and preserve our Earth's wildlife, which is why I'm so excited to be sharing our talk on Earth Day, which is technically it should be every day, as John said earlier. And so let's talk a bit about each of them. So John Rocco is the, esteemed illustrator and cover artist of the Percy Jackson series. And Hayley Rocco is an author, a world traveler, an activist, and she, along with John, both know the ins and outs of the book world. And they've teamed up to become what I like to call a super storytelling hero group. And
love that.
That's so nice.
Thank you. Yeah. So for the first question, together you wrote and illustrated the stunning picture book Wild Places. And it's a picture book filled with so much color and heart. And can you share to everybody who David Attenborough is and why you chose to create a picture book about his life?
Absolutely. So David Attenborough is he's not only a naturalist, but he's a nature broadcaster. So he has been on television since television started in the 50s. And so that's over 7 decades now, taking viewers into the wild places that most of us have never been. And it's so amazing that he's spent his life sharing these wild places with all of us. And I thought it would be amazing to not only share his story, but share how the world has changed within his lifetime. And I highly recommend his book and documentary, A Life on Our Planet, which kind of shows just that as well. So,
Well, now I've got something else to add to to my to be read list.
Yeah. When Haley read the book and then she talked to me about it, and then we watched the documentary during when COVID kind of kicked off. And it seemed his thought process on what we need to do as a humanity to help save this planet seemed very palatable for all ages, in a way that we could structure it in a way that any person could kind of read it and understand certain steps that can make a huge difference.
And see how important, his life mission has been for, his entire life. He's spent doing this, and it's
not everybody knows who he is.
A lot of people don't know who he is, especially in America.
Yeah, they know his voice, but they don't know him. And if you go to England, he's like a national treasure. I mean, they said
he's basically like a king.
They said once the Queen died, he became the most famous English person.
Yeah, so Wild Places is a celebration of our planet and all the wildlife that share it with us. So can you share the message you hope children, and of course picture books are for children and adults in my heart, and what do you think is the message that you hope that all readers take away from your story?
Well, I really hope that not only does it introduce kids to what it could be, to what this kind of job could be, to be a naturalist, to be working in the environment in some capacity, but also to encourage them that they can do something to help the world. And it doesn't matter what age you are, whether it's starting a garden and that's that has natural plants that attract butterflies and local animals to, you know, to recycling to, I mean, there's so many things that
Yeah, it's about
empowering young
children
readers to.
to really see the big picture, and a lot of the things that are presented in the book are not necessarily things that kids can go out and do. Like, a kid is not going to be able to change, uh, make a law that says we have no fishing zones, for instance. But a kid can actually write a letter to their state representative and say, "This is important to me to save our oceans." And the more they hear from you, the more they're
Mhm,
apt to change those laws.
mhm,
So it's about giving giving voice to that, giving voice to young people.
mhm.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that's really important. And yeah, you mentioned in your story just all the things that you can do that David Attenborough did. And like kids, a lot of us think that we don't really have a voice, but mentioning what you can do, mentioning what you should do to protect our planet, that's super important and really needed in the picture book space.
Thank you. Yeah. That's our hope and our mission. Yeah.
So, my next question for you is so I've talked a little bit about what David Attenborough has done for our, like, to, I guess, advocate for our environment, but you two are changing the world in your own right. You both co-founded Children's Book Creators for Conservation, and it's an organization made up of children's authors, illustrators, and many others who, well, love our planet and work to help support and protect our environment. So, can you share what your mission statement is and how CBCC came about?
Sure. So the CBCC came about after Haley had gone to South Africa on a
Mhm.
research trip
Oh,
to
wow.
do some research on pangolins for our book, Hello, I'm a Pangolin.
And that's where I got to meet a penguin. Yeah.
And when she came back, the first thing she said was, "Oh man, we need to bring other people to experience this, what I experienced when I was there, which was all of this conservation work."
Mhm.
And so we teamed up with an organization called Wild Tomorrow, and they're actively rewilding places in South Africa and creating new corridors for animals to be able to move. Um,
Mhm.
and so we said, let's create a group where we can bring other authors and illustrators to South Africa to experience this conservation
Mhm.
work firsthand, and see what kind of stories come out of it, what kind of books they might write,
Mhm.
what kind of experiences. Because the mission of the CBCC is really to connect students and readers with conservationists through
Mhm.
storytelling, through education, and through other
Mhm.
means that we're developing right now. Um, because I think that if you had a chance to spend time with a conservationist in the wild, you're going to see that they're incredible heroes. That what they do on a daily basis, especially in Africa, where there's these big game animals,
Mhm.
and the spaces that they're trying to revive that have been decimated by monocultures like
And
um,
farming. Yeah.
pineapples and
Mhm.
whatever else they're growing over there right now.
Well, in
Trees, I
this
mean
area, it's
trees
specifically mostly, pineapples, but.
and paper trees too. They
Mhm.
had huge swaths of land that were just these rows and rows and rows of trees, but it's just one kind of tree, right? So
Right.
animals don't want to live there, and eventually it destroys the land.
Mhm.
So it's important for us to recapture some of these places and rewild them. So anyway, the again to summarize, the mission of the CBCC is to really create that connective tissue between readers and
And
conservationists.
we're hoping that a lot of stories come out of this. We do know that some of the creative talent that came on our trip, our first trip, our inaugural trip, are working on books that were inspired from the experiences that we had there. So it's starting to happen. It's very new, and we're hoping that we can develop new trips, going to other places of need. and share more stories that way too.
This, as you mentioned earlier, this is not the first writing project that you've created together. So I happened upon your sweet story, How to Send a Hug, which is the heartfelt story that shows the wonderful impact writing and receiving handwritten letters can have. And I just kind of discovered it recently, so I wasn't able to get my hands on a copy, but I wish that I could have had one to share here. And yeah, as an illustrating and writing team, you each bring in your own unique talents and skills to your projects. So I guess my first I guess there are two questions in this. One, so do you first come up with the words for each panel or each page, or do the illustrations come first? And then, I guess, when does color come into play?
Well, for How to Send a Hug, I wrote that during the pandemic, and it was actually inspired by this guy. And one of the I'd always wanted to be a children's book writer, but I went in a different way, and I was working in publicity, and always wanted to be around children's books because I've always loved children's books. And anyway, so I was doing a lot of letter writing during the pandemic. It's just another way to connect versus just Zoom calls and phone calls, and I was getting a lot of letters in return. And one of the days I was writing some letters, John said, "That's the book you need to write." And that's the inspiration behind How to Send a Hug. And I wrote the manuscript, gave it to John, and then you can take it away with how it's all paneled out.
Yeah. So once Haley has a basic story in mind, she will write a first draft. It becomes very malleable at that point, because then I'll start doing thumbnail sketches and start sketching out ideas, and then we'll come up with gags or jokes or page turns that we like and moments, and that will sometimes adjust the story. Writing and illustrating, since I've done both, so I've done books where I've written and illustrated, and so in my mind they're always happening simultaneously. I'm sort of thinking of the pictures and writing and doodling all simultaneously. Well, with us, it's somewhat in that way. It's just two brains instead of one, and we kick it back and forth. So I'll try something, send it back to her. She might adjust, and
sometimes there will be words that are not necessary anymore, just because it's told through the pictures. So
with picture books, the writing and illustrating is a real dance. Between the words and the pictures, and to get it right, you need to be able to really have a clear understanding of what each is trying to do, and you don't necessarily want the pictures to do exactly what the words are saying, right? You want them to bring something else to the table, and the words can do something that the pictures can't, like describe a smell or a sound or how something feels. Right? Those are the senses that are not delivered by pictures so easily. So whenever we're working on something, that's something we always try to think about, is what senses can we talk about in the story that can't be in the photos or the drawings, and what can I put in the drawings that won't necessarily need to be in the words.
Yeah, and our offices are right next to each other, so we can just shout out at each other. It's fun.
Yeah, and I know with a lot of picture books, there have to be like emails sent back and forth, and not a ton of communication between the author and the illustrator. But when you're 2 rooms apart, it can be a lot easier.
That's
exactly.
True. Yes,
exactly.
We can get away with a lot more.
So now for a couple individual questions, one for John, and then we can shift to Haley. So there are tons of Percy Jackson fans out there, and I'm a huge Percy Jackson fan, and I can't not ask you about your Percy Jackson illustration creative journey. So for those tuning in who don't already know, John actually crafted the gorgeous cover art for many of Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson books. There's, of course, the first one, Percy Jackson and the Olympians. There's Magnus Chase and the Gods of Asgard, Trials of Apollo, and it's just incredible. You also did Percy Jackson's Greek Gods and Greek Heroes. It's super cool. And I guess, since you also illustrate picture books, I'm curious, how does the process of creating drawings for cover art differ from picture book illustrations? And my second question for you is, how did you first get the opportunity to design art for Rick Riordan's books? Did he reach out to you, or was it kind of from the publisher that really initiated it?
Sure. Well, I'll start with the second question first, because before I did the very first cover, which was The Lightning Thief, I had never illustrated a book jacket, and honestly, I hadn't seen a lot of middle grade book jackets. I was primarily focused on picture books at the time, um, and how I got that was I had done a picture book many years before, um, and it was just kind of one book that I did, and the editor turned out to be someone who was working on the Lightning Thief book, and I was trying to get back into the children's book world. I hadn't worked in children's books for like 15 years, and I ran into him, and he said, "Oh, we've got a book. It needs a new cover, um, and we think you'll like it." And so that's how I got to do the very first cover of the Lightning Thief, and from there it kind of snowballed into doing. I think I did 27 jackets
Wow.
for Rick's books
Yeah.
over like the course of 15 years or something like that. Um, and so for the very first cover, when I read the book, I realized this is not a book about Greek mythology. This is a book about a kid that's stuck in the middle of two adults having an argument. And I felt like if I tackled the image in that way, then it could relate in a sort of different way, and it wouldn't be about, oh, this is another book about Greek mythology.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's why I placed the boy in the water, because his father was Poseidon, and there's a very storm cloud sky, and so that shows the sort of argument and the tension between Zeus and Poseidon, and he's kind of stuck in the middle of this.
Yeah.
Um, and so I just did the sketch and brought it in, and they were like, "Yeah, we love it, and go for it." And then the book went on to sell a lot of copies, and they wanted me to do the rest of that series, and then I did a redo of that series at one point, um, and then the other series that he wrote. And whenever I would read the book, I would try to think about not necessarily a scene from the book, but what does this book represent? What is the story behind
Mm.
this? And that always helped define what I would do as a finished illustration. And I'd usually get it in the first two or three sketches. I would figure something out, and my publisher was pretty good about, yeah, that's great, do that. Um, and so it kind of worked out. It was a phenomenal uh, 15 years of doing those covers. I was doing at least two covers a year for a while when he had multiple series going.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think I answered both your
Yeah.
questions. Okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that just sounds like an incredible experience, and I mean, like, the covers are so intricate, both, as you said earlier, just, like, the constant, I guess, struggle that Percy has to deal with, but also the covers are all connected, and
Mhm.
that's another thing that really caught my attention as well.
Mm.
So
Well,
yeah.
a little behind the scene tidbit, which is kind of fun. At a certain point, they needed the covers before Rick had even finished the stories, which made it kind of tricky. But I would get on the phone with Rick, and he would tell me the story, and then together we would kind of come up with some idea of what might make a good cover. And I would send him the sketches so that he could make sure that I had all the details right, like what kind of clothes were they wearing in the scene, or what have you. So
Yeah.
that made it kind of a unique experience after maybe the 10th book. we're there with, and they're like, "We need the cover," and I'm like, "I don't know what the story is."
Yeah.
Call Rick to ask him. So I got to hear the stories first, which was kind of neat,
Yeah. That
Uh,
does sound neat. Yeah. And now Haley's been kind of sitting there, like listening. So now it's time for you to jump in. So you show on your website some picture books that you created when you were little, when you were in first and second grade. And you worked as a publicist at several major publishers. So you've kind of always been surrounded by children's books and that kind of writing mindset. So I guess my question for you is, how did you find a way to take your passion for writing and really turn it into a publishing reality?
hmm. Well, that's a good question. So I was very well. I loved when I was a kid. I wanted to become a children's book author and illustrator. Good thing I'm not an illustrator today. But I kind of I kind of went a different route and went into journalism because I thought at the time that that was probably more practical for me. And but I still wanted to be in children's books, so I went in through the publicity route, and I loved publicity and promoting children's books and talking about children's books and learning everything I could about children's books. And so I always felt connected to the world. And it wasn't until um, the pandemic when John said, "That's it. You need to write. You need to finally attack your dream." And so that is, I no longer had excuses because we were all locked in, right? And so that's kind of how it started. And I just haven't looked back, and it's been a dream come true for me to be able to write about what I means a lot to me, that I'm passionate about, and that we get to work together, and we work so well together, fortunately. Uh, yeah, so it was kind of a different path, but now we're here, and who knows where we'll go.
That you actually do have more books coming out in the future. So, Wild Places has not been the only story that you've worked on together lately. So, you have
Mhm.
some more wild loving books coming up very soon. Your Meet the Wild Thing stories are releasing for this year as well. And I am so excited. I'm really, really excited. And so, for everybody listening or watching, can you please share a bit about these stories and the inspiration behind the series?
Absolutely. So well, for me, when I was doing research for wild places, I went down some rabbit holes on endangered animals because it's coming up, right? Like what's
Yeah.
happening with the loss of wild places. And that's when I discovered that pangolins are the most trafficked animal in the world. And I barely knew anything about pangolins. And I thought, does anybody know a lot about pangolins? They're fascinating creatures. And so I learned a lot about them. I went to South Africa and got to meet a pangolin in the wild that had been trafficked and saved from the trafficking world. And I thought, gosh, I love animals. I've always loved animals. So it's always animals and children's books. Those are two of the big things in my life as a kid. Um, and so that's kind of what inspired the Meet the Wild Things series, which are
But also, there's a quote from Jane Goodall.
mhm,
My teacher did a portrait of Jane Goodall, which we have on our wall, and the quote is, "We must speak for those who cannot speak for themselves."
Oh, I love that.
And these books are us giving voice to these endangered animals,
mhm,
sharing their stories, but also sharing their plight, and also sharing what you can do
to
to
help.
help them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it also showcases the conservationists who are helping too. So it's kind of the animals having a conversation with the reader and saying, "This is who I am." You get a sense of what kind of animal they are as far as temperament, and they ask the reader questions about themselves as well. Um, so there's fun facts, and then why they're endangered, who's helping, and how you can help too. And the goal is, these are for very young readers, for
Yeah.
I would say ages 3 to 7.
Right.
But yeah, the goal is to really get kids excited about these endangered animals, and want to help. And
Yeah,
Mhm.
so we have, 6 of them coming out, spread out
Woo! Yeah.
time. Yeah, we have, Hello, I'm a Penguin and Hello, I'm a Sloth coming out
this
this
June,
June, and then Hello, I'm a Quokka, which is coming out in the fall, and then the following spring, Hello, I'm an Axolotl,
Yeah.
which many people think there's lots of axolotls, and there are, but they're all in aquariums and labs.
Yeah.
In the wild, they don't know there could be less than 50
Oh,
left in the
wow.
world.
yeah,
Yeah,
because they only live in one lake in right underneath Mexico City. So it's they're
That's
technically
great.
endangered. Yeah,
very endangered. Yeah.
very, very endangered. So
Yeah, you guys are really spreading the word about these animals who really I love what you said earlier, just kind of being a voice for them because they can't speak for themselves, and it's so needed, and the animals deserve this. I mean, because humans kind of initiated a lot of the problems that, endangered species are facing. So, since
exactly,
humans caused the problem, so we have to solve it as well.
Mhm.
exactly. That's the hope that we can, and hopefully we can inspire some parents in here too
Yeah.
who can help out. So
So, kids, if you're watching, send some letters to maybe representatives in your communities, parents, just kind of be the change, inspire your kids, read these stories to them. It'll really change their mindset. And that does not mean we're done with the questions, though. I still have a couple more for you. And one that I'm really excited to ask because I just feel like you're gonna have I guess a wild answer. So if you could choose one song that perfectly fits your book, Wild Places, which would it be and why?
oh, well, that's an easy one. What a Wonderful World by
Oh,
Louis Armstrong.
that's an
Yeah,
amazing
There.
one.
yeah,
There's some good ones out there, but
it
that's
and that one just, it's so there's so much hope in that song,
Mhm.
and joy, and, you know, it's so easy to go down this dark road with all of this conservation and climate change and everything else, but, what we wanted to provide in the book Wild Places was also the sense of hope,
that we can do it together.
yeah.
Yeah, we can
And
help.
so that's an important message, especially for the young people, because I'm not young anymore, and we're leaving the planet, to the rest of the youth, and, and so we want to do whatever we can to help.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And your inspiration, your messages that you're sharing are really gonna leave an impact on all of us. And hopefully all of us will be inspired and take on that challenge to protect our country, protect our world from and protect endangered species because we have to.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
And now my final question for you, which makes me sad, but I'm also interested to hear what you'll say. So, if you could be or meet any literary character, I guess you could meet your favorite author or your favorite book character, who would it be and why?
Well, I know who I'd want to be. And this was when, gosh, I was probably your age. I read the book, which my grandfather had given to me, The True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle by Abby. Um, and it's about adventure on the high seas. This young girl, she's 13. She's she has to deal with mutiny on this ship all by herself, and there's murder and intrigue, and she kind of saves the whole crew. And I was like, wow, she is so cool. Like she embodies girl strength, girl power, and I want to be her. That is so cool. And she ends up going across the sea, going back home with her, meeting up with her family, and like she's like, "This is lame. I don't want to be here anymore," because she learns her dad's kind of not great. Um, so she goes back to sea on the very vessel that she came across from England in, and so I don't know. I just she was very inspired, and I always was inspired by explorers and books about explorers. And even though she was a fictional character, I was very much in awe of her.
And for me, it goes back to my childhood. Some of my favorite books were um, like Encyclopedia Brown.
Yes.
Was a character that I thought, I want to be like. I want to go out and solve mysteries and do kind of sciencey things and figure things out, And so he was always like this character that I was like wanted to be like, you know. Um, yeah, it's a good question. It's tricky too
It's
because
tricky.
there's so many authors that I haven't met that I'd
Mhm.
love to meet, and there's so many great characters that you could see yourself as.
Right.
And I think any good author hopes to write a character that someone wants to be, or someone could
Mhm.
step into their shoes for 200 or 300 pages and really feel what it's like to be that person.
You know who would have been really cool to meet would be Gary Paulson.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I loved his books growing up too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Those are great answers. And I mean, I've read some books by Avi. I haven't yet read Charlotte Doyle yet, so that's one I'm gonna definitely check out. And Encyclopedia Brown is a classic. I love that answer. And of course, Gary Paulson, he wrote amazing stories as well.
Mm. Yeah, you've read Hatchet, right?
Yeah, I read Hatchet. We
Oh,
read
yeah.
actually it was a read aloud a couple years back in 4th grade. So maybe that was a little bit too early, but
Sounds about right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like My Side of the Mountain comes first, and then you graduate to Hatchet, and
Yeah.
then Touching Spirit Bear would be like the next level. I don't know if you've read that one.
Yeah,
Um,
not yet, but yeah.
that's a great book, but it's rough. It's a rough.
Yeah, it's I mean, you know that you kinda made it when you have, like, different levels of your own stories, like, "Oh, one day you'll graduate to, like, this level of my stories." Like,
Right.
That's
so
right.
so this has been an amazing talk. I've really enjoyed speaking with both of you, and your answers to my questions were fantastic. So, thank you so much for taking time out of your day.
Aw.
E-Train, you are a fantastic interviewer,
Yes, you
and
are.
Yeah.
This has
you
been
should
amazing
be.
for
We're
us.
we're thrilled to be on your program, podcast, show thing. Um, and good luck with doing more. I mean,
Thank you.
they
It's
need
great to see that you're doing this. It's very powerful, and it
you
means a
need to
lot
have
to
your own
this
show
world.
Yeah.
on TV, just interviewing authors.
Maybe
That'd
that's
be
the next step, right?
yeah,
Maybe. Yeah. So
But
yeah.
thank you for having us.
absolutely. And everybody, I always say keep on reading, but when I say keep on reading today, you know what I mean. I mean, read Wild Places, Life of Naturalist David Attenborough. It's a fantastic read. And now I just want to show you some of the illustrations, some of the words. This is just, I mean, look at this. This is just one random page I flipped to. Look at this, everybody. This is incredible. This is truly phenomenal. It's a story that will stay in my heart. It will stay in all of your hearts. And it's just one of a kind. You won't find any other story like it. And I mean, actually, you know what? I hope that we do because we need more stories about these conservationists that changed the world and are still changing the world. So you can learn so much from Hayley and John Rocco if you check out their websites and their social media pages. And keep on reading, and I'll see all of you in the next one. Bye bye.